Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Heavy Industry Sound. Today we'll be discussing how to get material suppliers in capital projects to buy in on new software. So, for example, a project-wide document sharing tool or a material delivery tracking system. With me in the studio I have my colleague Marika.
Hello, how are you, Veera?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine.
I'm so glad you could join me.
Yes, me too. I'm very happy to be here and I'm actually very excited to discuss about this topic today. So, implementing new capital project software can be very challenging because large industrial plant project may involve hundreds of suppliers and stakeholders globally. For example, when a new oil refinery, pulp mill, or power plant is being built. And getting these hundreds of suppliers from external organizations on board with using a new system does present its challenges.
Definitely. And further challenges are presented by the fact that capital construction projects are temporary in nature, and businesses also tend to manage their individual investment projects independently from one another. So essentially, that means that the same digital tools and the same suppliers won't necessarily be used across all capital projects.
Exactly. And another big difference compared to implementing software internally is that traditionally, if business management makes a purchase decision and implements a new SAP or ERP system, at the end of the day, the organization doesn't really have a choice but to learn to use the system. So unfortunately, the same rule doesn't really apply when trying to get external suppliers to commit to using new digital tools.
Precisely. But that's why we're here discussing this topic today.
Exactly.
So, for the past 20 years, our company LogiNets has been working on onboarding entire capital project networks to our material handling system, which is a materials tracking tool for investment projects. So today we are here to reveal our tested and tried best practices for getting external stakeholders and suppliers on board with using a new project-wide capital project software.
Exactly. So, should we maybe start by quickly covering why it is so important to get suppliers buy-in in the first place?
Yes, let's do that. That's a fantastic idea. So, the obvious key reason to aim for supplier buy-in of your selected software is that, simply put, you can get better value for your organization.
Yes.
Building strong supplier relationships to last across multiple investment projects can bring you dedicated service, preferential pricing, and more efficient supply chains. So essentially, you have a chance of making your capital project supply chains more efficient, cost-effective, and productive.
Yes. And on the other hand, without the proper supplier management process, suppliers might start seeing their buyers simply as negotiators who are not interested in mutual growth opportunities, right?
Exactly, yes. So to bring in a real-life example, in the case of the material handling system, the role of supplier buy-in is especially highlighted. Materials and procurement can represent over 80% of an investment project costs. And getting materials delivered on time and having material or having transparent material flows is a key player in the success of a capital project. And essentially what that means is that your suppliers play a key role in your material flows, and material flows are an extremely crucial part of your capital projects. And in the material handling system, the information on the products and deliveries for the project team is only as good as the supplier's input.
Yes. So, okay, I think we have covered why it is important to get suppliers on board with using a new project-wide software. So, should we now move on to naming a few of the best practices for implementing new software for suppliers?
Yes, sounds perfect. Let's move on. So the first big thing I'd say is to keep your suppliers in mind when you're selecting the software or when you're evaluating your service providers. Ensure that the software you're selecting is easy to use for suppliers especially if getting the suppliers to adapt to using the new software is a critical success factor for you gaining your benefits of why you chose to get this tool in the first place. If the software you've chosen creates an unnecessarily large burden on suppliers and their processes, you can be sure that you'll have a lot of unhappy stakeholders. So let's bring in another real-life example. We've heard of projects where materials are tracked using RFID tags. So suppliers are expected to put RFID tags on all of their hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of components that they're delivering for the end customer. And suppliers are expected to not only input details of those materials in a system, they're also expected to input the RFID tag codes into the system and put the actual RFID tags on the products. And that creates hundreds of extra hours for suppliers.
Yes. So what can you do to evaluate if a software will be easy or difficult for suppliers to use?
That's a very good question. And I'd say that here are some things that you should be asking your potential software service providers. And you should use the answer to these questions to evaluate how easy their software would be to use from the supplier's perspective.
Yes.
Okay, so number one, which languages are supported?
Yes, especially if you're working with global suppliers, you really want to ensure that the software is at minimum available in English.
Precisely. Okay, moving on. Number two, you should be asking how is onboarding and training of suppliers into the system handled? So what is the responsibility of the project team and what will the software service provider be responsible for?
Yes, that's very important.
Exactly. Number three, you should be asking how does customer support work? What times is customer support available and what is the cost of customer support?
Yes, and if you have suppliers globally, you want to make sure that the customer support is not limited to, for example, only European business hours.
Exactly. And here are some other questions that you might want to ask when you're evaluating different software service providers. So how long have you been in business? What feedback have you received from suppliers in past similar projects? Do you have any references we can contact? What resources do you offer after implementation and what is the cost of that? And what's your long-term strategy for your business and the specific product?
Okay, so these have been very great tips. Thank you so much, Veera. So any other best practices besides prioritizing easy of use for the suppliers when selecting the software?
Yes, for sure. Next, you should really try to focus on the question, what's in it for the supplier?
Yes, that's important actually.
Yeah, when you're discussing the software with suppliers, you should be looking at what help or ease of processes come for the supplier from using the software. Rather than telling the supplier all the amazing benefits that you will get from having your suppliers use that software, focus on the direct benefits for the supplier. Let me put it this way, Marika. Let me ask you a question.
Oh, okay, sure.
Which of the following statements would make you be more likely to want to cycle to work tomorrow? Option number one, Marika, you should cycle to work tomorrow because Helsinki wants to reduce traffic during the peak morning hours. Okay. Or option number two, Marika, you should really cycle to work tomorrow because it decreases the likelihood of getting certain diseases. You get to increase your cardiovascular fitness, you increase your muscle strength, you become more flexible, and all the while you reduce stress and also reduce your carbon footprint.
Well, this is pretty easy. Well, the second option for sure.
Yes, so that's exactly what I'm getting at. You might not be able to know all the benefits from the outset of specific software or of specific working processes, but make sure that you work with your software service provider to identify all the different benefits for the supplier. They might be able to give you really good insights based on previous customers and projects and feedback from supplier networks in previous projects.
So do you have any examples?
Yeah, of course, for sure. So I will give examples of the material handling system because that's where I have most expertise in. So we encourage our customers to highlight that the material handling system creates automatic packing lists that always meet the purchaser's needs. And that means that the material suppliers don't have to worry about creating new packing list templates or they don't have to worry about going through processes of not having their packing lists approved. And another benefit of our software for material suppliers is the transparency of information. So our customers could ask if their suppliers have ever been in instances where the purchaser claims that certain materials were missing from packages or containers, or certain deliveries never arrived at the project site. And with a materials tracking system, everyone has access to the same delivery information, and suppliers can, for example, take pictures of their packages and containers, and those are really beneficial tools for resolving any potential disputes. And lastly, through using the material handling system, suppliers also get rid of a lot of manual Excel and email work that they would otherwise have to do in projects.
That's really important, actually. So, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense right now. But is motivating the suppliers and an easy software enough to guarantee implementation?
No, unfortunately not. You really need to get it in writing. So include the use of your chosen software as a supplier's obligation in your contracts. And I mean, we're all aware legal contracts, they're not the best grounds for genuine motivation to use a new software, but these clauses are key to resolving potential issues with suppliers. So when you have projects with hundreds of suppliers, which each might have tens of people working for your project, you are bound to come across some individuals who don't want to collaborate using new digital tools. And when more efficient methods of motivating the supplier don't work, disputes are easier to resolve when referring to the contract that the supplier themselves has signed.
Yes, so we have also discussed implementing a constructual no system, use no pay policy with some of customers. So much like no PO, no pay policy is very common in many large companies.
Exactly. So if use of the software by suppliers is business critical to you, you could consider implementing a similar policy in regards to the use of your chosen capital project software. So for example, in some of our past projects, payment of materials has been released once the goods have been marked as unloaded at the construction site. And if your suppliers are aware that they won't get paid for products which haven't been input into your system, you're bound to get detailed and correct lists of products and their delivery times.
Yes, that's very interesting. Okay, these have all been very great tips. Thank you so much, Veera. So I have one more question. So would you say with all this in mind companies should move to using digital tools, or should they just stick to their existing methods of tracking material deliveries via Excels and emails?
That is actually a fantastic question. But I think that topic deserves its own podcast episode, don't you think?
Well, yes, actually. So let's regroup in another session.
Fantastic, let's do that. Thank you so much, Marika, for joining me today.
Thank you.
And from my side, thank you to all of our listeners.
Yes, thank you.
See you in the next podcast episode.
Bye.
Bye.